Imagine a shot that should have been the cover of the decade. A perfect, glossy image symbolizing the union of the two most physically perfect humans on planet Earth, but which in a fraction of a second turned into documentary evidence of a humiliation hidden from the eyes of millions. The calendar reads July 1977. We are in a stifling Los Angeles photo studio, overheated by the glare of spotlights, where the air smells of chemical fixatives, expensive cologne, and an off-the-charts level of male ego. In the center of the composition stand two titans, two living deities who have divided the world's admiration between them. On one side is Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Austrian Oak, a man who has just won his 7th Mr. Olympia title and is preparing to become the Terminator. His body is a mountain of muscle carved from granite, a monument to human strength. On the other side is Muhammad Ali, the greatest, a boxer who turned violence into art, a man whose reflexes are faster than thought. They smile for the cameras, they pose, but if you look closely at their eyes, you will see that this is not a meeting of friends. This is a duel, and the weapons in this duel are not gloves or barbells, but one simple, ritualistic movement, a handshake. You probably think that Arnold, being a boxing fan, felt a sense of reverent awe toward Ali. That's the version they write in memoirs. The reality, however, was saturated with cynical competition. In 1977, Schwarzenegger was obsessed with the idea that bodybuilding was not just a beauty pageant, but the highest form of functional strength. He looked at Ali and saw not a legend, but a challenge. In his ambition-fueled mind, one thought pulsed: boxers are only strong in gloves. Remove the distance, get him in a grip, and he'll crumble. Arnold decided to test this theory right here and now while the photographers were changing film. He extended his massive palm like an excavator bucket and gripped Ali's hand. But this was no greeting. It was a trap. Arnold began to squeeze his fingers. Ask yourself honestly, what would you feel if your hand began to be crushed by a hydraulic press capable of deadlifting 550 pounds? Arnold wasn't just shaking hands. He was trying to crush Ali's bones to see a grimace of pain on the face of the man who called himself the prettiest. He wanted to prove that the static strength of muscle surpasses the dynamic strength of a boxer. At this moment, the viewer expects Ali, known for his character, to start struggling, to tense his forearms in an attempt to overpower the giant in this game of testosterone. But here, the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, causing your brain to stall. Ali did not tense up, at all. In response to the monstrous pressure that would bring tears to a normal person's eyes, Ali's hand became soft, fluid, like water. He did not accept the challenge of strength. He allowed Arnold to squeeze a void. And here, in this moment of strange, unnatural calm, we need to focus our attention on a detail missed by everyone else in the studio, but which became the key to the finale. This is our narrative dagger, the bulging, pulsating vein on Arnold's right forearm. Look at it closely. It is as thick as a finger, stretched to the limit under tanned skin, pumping liters of blood into the tensed muscles of the hand. For Arnold, this vein is a symbol of his power, proof of his work in the gym. But for Muhammad Ali, who looked at the world through the prism of the anatomy of vulnerability, this vein was not a sign of strength. It was a map. It was a target. It was an open door into the opponent's nervous system. Ali smiled his signature, dazzling smile, looking Schwarzenegger straight in the eye, but his brain at that second was working like a computer, calculating a strike trajectory. He understood that playing by Arnold's rules meant losing. If he tried to squeeze back, his bones would snap because mass wins. So Ali decided to change the game. He decided to show Mr. Olympia that muscle volume is merely armor, and every armor has gaps. While Arnold, relishing his physical superiority, continued to increase the pressure, certain that the boxer was about to drop to his knees, Ali's fingers made a microscopic movement, invisible to the cameras. He didn't squeeze Arnold's palm. His thumb, hard and precise as a sculptor's chisel, began to slide along the inside of the giant's wrist, feeling for that exact spot where the vein crosses the median nerve, a spot unprotected by even a single gram of pumped muscle. Arnold saw Ali's smile and thought it was bravado, a mask of despair. He didn't know that this smile was the smile of a sapper who had just found the right wire and had already positioned the cutters over it, preparing to turn a triumph of strength into an agony of helplessness with a single press that requires no effort, but requires absolute knowledge of human nature. To realize the full surreality and hidden brutality of this moment, frozen in time under the camera flashes, you need to get inside Muhammad Ali's head and see the world through his eyes. What was happening in the studio was not a photo session, but a sophisticated torture disguised as friendliness. Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't just holding his hand, he had turned his palm into a vice, methodically increasing the pressure with every passing second, enjoying the way Ali's knuckles began to creak under the onslaught of his monstrous, steroid-fueled power. For the Austrian Oak, this was a game, a demonstration of the superiority of the new era of fitness over the old school of boxing. But for Ali, it was a challenge that could not be ignored, yet could not be met head-on. He felt the pain like sharp needles piercing his wrist, the blood draining from his fingers, and any other man in his place would have cried out long ago, jerked his hand away, or tried to strike the insolent giant with a free left hook to end the mockery. But Ali stood motionless, continuing to smile into the lens, and that smile was the most dangerous mask he had ever worn. Behind it lay not fear, but the cold calculation of a predator caught in a snare, who already knows how to make the hunter step on the mechanism himself. In Ali's head, working with the speed of a supercomputer, an instantaneous analysis of the situation was taking place, the conveyor belt principle that makes you watch every microscopic change in his facial expression. He understood that physics was against him. Arnold weighed 60 pounds more. His forearms were thicker than a normal man's calves, and trying to overpower him in a static squeeze would be as foolish as trying to stop a train with your bare hands. If Ali tensed his muscles, if he tried to resist the pressure, his bones simply wouldn't hold, and he would lose this silent duel in front of the journalists. So he did what contradicts the survival instinct of any man whose masculinity is being questioned. He completely, totally relaxed his hand. His hand became soft, yielding, fluid, like the water Bruce Lee spoke of, and this sudden lack of resistance caught Arnold off guard. Schwarzenegger expected to meet stone, but his fingers fell into a void, and for a split second, he lost his concentration, trying to understand why the champion wasn't fighting back. It was in this exact moment when Arnold, intoxicated by his apparent victory, decided to finish off the weakling, that Ali went on the offensive, an offensive invisible to the cameras, but fatal for the bodybuilder. Remember our dagger, that bulging vein on the inside of Arnold's wrist. Ali wasn't looking at it. He was feeling it. His thumb, which seemed relaxed, began to make microscopic, searching movements, sliding over the giant's sweat-dampened skin. He wasn't looking for muscle. He was looking for a gap in the armor. Ali knew anatomy not from textbooks, but from the pain he inflicted and the pain inflicted upon him. He knew that under this mountain of biceps and triceps, beneath that vein, runs the median nerve, a thin, unprotected thread connecting the hand to the brain. This was the Terminator's Achilles heel, the off button that nature left on every human body, regardless of how much iron they lift. The viewer at this moment feels the tension reach its peak. Arnold continues to smile his Hollywood smile, certain he is humiliating the boxing legend, while Ali, looking him straight in the eyes with a playful squint, slowly, millimeter by millimeter, drives his thumb into the soft tissue under Arnold's wrist. It was a scene from a horror movie, where the victim doesn't know the killer is already in the room. Ali was in no hurry. He savored the moment. He allowed Arnold to believe in his own omnipotence so that the fall from the pedestal would be more painful. He felt the nerve bundle, a small, hard point hidden between the tendons, and froze. He had only one move left to make, a light press requiring no strength, to turn the hand of the strongest man in the world into a useless piece of meat pierced by electrical pain. In the studio, camera shutters clicked. Photographers pleaded, "One more shot, guys. Show us the strength." And Arnold, beaming with self-satisfaction, squeezed Ali's hand even harder, unaware that he had just pulled the trigger of a trap that would snap shut in an instant, making him forget his titles and remember that he was just a human of flesh, blood, and very sensitive nerves. In that very second, when Arnold Schwarzenegger, this living monument of steel and ambition, put the last reserves of his titanic power into his handshake, a visual silence descended upon the overheated Los Angeles photo studio, the kind that makes your ears ring and your head spin. You probably expect the sound of breaking bones, or for Muhammad Ali, unable to endure the torture, to cry out and try to strike the giant with a free left hand. That would be logical for any human being facing the strength of the Austrian Oak. But the reality of that July day in 1977 was written by laws not taught in weightlifting gyms. Time in the studio didn't just slow down. It crystallized, turning into a viscous, transparent substance where every glint of the spotlight on Arnold's sweaty skin seemed like a supernova flash. Schwarzenegger continued to smile his signature, white-toothed winner's smile, but if you could have stepped closer, you would have seen the first, barely perceptible seed of bewilderment beginning to sprout behind that mask of confidence. Why isn't Ali's hand resisting? Why isn't he trying to break free? And most importantly, what is this strange, almost intimate pressure he feels on his wrist? The viewer holds their breath because here, the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, turning everything upside down. In this pair, the predator was not the one with the mountain of muscle. Muhammad Ali, whose trembling right hand was usually a sign of ailment, had now turned his infirmity into an instrument of surgical precision. He didn't squeeze Arnold's palm in return. Instead, he used the relaxation of his hand to slip deeper, past the barrier of the giant's tense tendons. His thumb, hard and precise as a wasp's sting, found that very black mark on the Terminator's body, our narrative detail, the bulging vein beneath which the median nerve was hidden. You think you need a hammer to cause a giant pain? You're wrong. Ali knew a secret that bodybuilders had ignored for decades. The larger the muscle, the more it compresses its own nerve endings when subjected to the wrong kind of pressure. Ali slightly shifted the angle of pressure, and in that same second, an electrical discharge comparable to a lightning strike shot through Arnold's arm from his fingertips to his very shoulder. This wasn't just discomfort. It was a flash of primal, blinding pain that paralyzes the will faster than any knockout. The smile on Schwarzenegger's face didn't just vanish. It peeled away, exposing a grimace of such deep, animal shock that the world had never seen from Mr. Olympia. His eyes widened behind his dark lenses, and the breath he had so carefully controlled for the shot broke with a hoarse, stifled gasp. He wanted to unclench his fingers. He wanted to let go of Ali's hand, but something happened that makes the viewer's brain stall from the paradox. Ali wouldn't let him go. Ask yourself honestly, what does a hunter feel when he realizes his hand is glued to a victim that has suddenly begun to devour him from the inside? Ali held the grip, using Arnold's own inertia against him. He looked the giant in the eyes, and there was no hatred in that gaze, only the icy, terrifying clarity of a master demonstrating to a student his insignificance. "You pump armor, Arnold," Ali whispered, and his voice, usually quiet and hoarse, sliced through the studio silence like a razor. "But I hit through the armor. Your muscles are a prison in which you've locked yourself. You thought you were holding me? No, it is I who allowed you to touch my power." Every word from Ali was accompanied by a microscopic increase in pressure on the nerve bundle, and Arnold, a man who could squat 700 pounds, began to slowly, ignominiously sink to one knee. A vacuum hung in the studio. Photographers forgot to press their shutter buttons. Assistants froze with reflectors in their hands. Everyone saw a 240-pound mountain of muscle capitulate to a small, almost invisible movement of a boxer's fingers. It was the collapse of the entire philosophy of physical dominance, a triumph of reflexes over mass, taking place in total, deafening silence. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the icon of strength, stood on one knee before Ali, who was sitting in a chair, and his face was as pale as marble, with a large bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. He realized he had made the most terrible mistake of his life. He had tried to measure Muhammad Ali's greatness by the standards of the gym, not understanding that before him was not an athlete, but a force of nature that cannot be gripped because it has no form, yet is capable of destroying you from within with a single touch to the truth of your own anatomy. And at that moment, when the pain reached its peak, Ali did something that finally destroyed the Terminator's ego, turning a physical victory into a moral execution whose consequences would haunt Arnold for decades to come. In that very second, when Arnold Schwarzenegger's knee hit the parquet with a dull, humiliating thud, reality in that overheated studio finally cracked, leaving those present in a state of paralyzing shock. You expect the Austrian Oak to explode in rage, leap up, and simply crush Muhammad Ali with his mass, for a predator's instinct demands immediate revenge for such a public fall. But here the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, causing your brain to freeze. Arnold didn't move. He froze, staring at his own hand with an expression of superstitious horror, as if it no longer belonged to him. A visual silence reigned in the studio, where even the dust motes in the spotlight seemed motionless, and the sound of one's own pulse in the ears became louder than the noise of Los Angeles outside. The photographers, their fingers frozen on shutter buttons, saw not the Olympia champion, but a man who had just encountered an alien technology of combat. Muhammad Ali slowly, with almost surgical caution, began to unclench his fingers, and this movement was filled with such overwhelming superiority that it wounded Schwarzenegger's ego more than any physical pain. Look at our narrative dagger, that very bulging vein on Arnold's wrist, which just a minute ago was a symbol of his titanic power. Now it looked like evidence in a perfect crime scene. Ali didn't just press a point, he demonstrated an intellectual orgasm of biomechanics, showing that this entire mountain of muscle is merely decoration if you don't control the channels through which the brain sends signals to the body. He found the single gap in the Terminator's armor, that very off switch of the nervous system that Arnold, accustomed to working with iron, didn't even suspect existed. As soon as the pressure vanished, blood rushed back into Schwarzenegger's numbed hand, bringing with it a wave of heat and tingling. But Arnold continued to stand on his knee, not daring to look up. He realized that Ali wasn't just a fast boxer. He realized that Ali was a being who saw the world in a different resolution, where flesh is merely a map of levers and vulnerabilities. Ask yourself honestly, what does a man feel who has built an empire on his strength when he is brought to his knees without a single blow, by the simple touch of a finger? Arnold rose slowly, his movements heavy and clumsy, as if he were relearning how to manage his massive body. He began to rub his wrist, trying to hide the trembling in his fingers, but in that silence, every move was under a microscope. Ali didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He did something that finally destroyed Arnold's ego. He extended the very hand Schwarzenegger had tried to crush, but this time, his palm was open and relaxed. It was a gesture of forgiveness, the gesture of a teacher who had just taught a painful but necessary lesson. "Muscles are just meat, Arnold," Ali said, and his voice, quiet and vibrating with Parkinson's, sounded like thunder. "They can impress the spectators, but they cannot stop what they cannot see. You pump your body to be tough on the outside, but I train my spirit to be sharp on the inside. You tried to break my hand, but you forgot that the hand is only a tool. My strength is not in my fist. It is in the void that you couldn't catch." At that moment, a total revolution occurred in Arnold's head. He realized that his training, his diets, his titles, all of it was merely preparation for an encounter with a reality for which he was completely unprepared. He looked at Ali, and for the first time in his career, there was no competitive fire in his gaze. There was pure, childlike awe. He realized that Muhammad Ali wasn't just the greatest in boxing. He was a master of managing chaos. The photographers finally began to shoot, and those frames, where Arnold respectfully shakes the hand of the seated Ali, would later be called the meeting of two worlds, but none of those who would see them in magazines would know about those 3 seconds of the Terminator's absolute helplessness. Ali smiled, and in that smile there was no malice, only the wisdom of a man who had long ago passed through all the circles of hell and fame, and knew that true power is not when you can crush someone else's hand, but when you can allow an enemy to touch your nerve and still remain the master of the situation. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked out of that studio a different man, taking with him not only a photo with his idol, but a burning understanding that there are forces in the world that cannot be pumped up in a gym, and that Muhammad Ali had just dealt him the most important blow of his life, a blow to his blind confidence in his own invincibility. When Arnold Schwarzenegger finally straightened up, rubbing his numbed wrist, the thick, tangible smell of ozone from burnt-out flashes and the cold sweat of the Austrian Oak still hung in the studio. The photographers, having just witnessed the collapse of a titan, frantically checked their cameras, fearing they had missed the only moment in history when the Terminator looked like a frightened child. Do you think that after this, Arnold simply turned and walked away, harboring a grudge in his massive heart? That would be logical for a man whose ego was the size of California. But here, the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, forcing you to look at Schwarzenegger's personality in a new way. He didn't leave. He sat on the floor at Muhammad Ali's feet, right there, on the dirty parquet, among the wires and light stands, forgetting his status as the king of bodybuilding and a future Hollywood icon. He looked at his right hand, at that very bulging vein, our narrative dagger, which was still pulsating under his skin, and a tectonic shift in his entire worldview was occurring in his brain. Ask yourself honestly, what is it like to realize that everything you believed in, everything you built your life and career on, turned out to be just a pretty wrapper? Arnold realized that this vein he was so proud of was not a channel of strength, but a map of his vulnerability. He realized that Ali didn't just press a button. Ali showed him the difference between meat and spirit. Do you think it was just a random trick? You're wrong. It was a message encoded in pain. Schwarzenegger would later admit to a close circle of friends that it was in those 3 seconds in 1977 that he first understood what a real Terminator should actually look like. Not as a mountain of muscle, but as a will that cannot be bent because it cannot be caught in a grip. It was an intellectual orgasm of realization. True strength is not in crushing someone else's palm, but in knowing the weak points of reality itself. But here the story takes another sharp turn that will give you goosebumps. Decades passed. Arnold became a governor, a movie legend, a wealthy man. Ali, however, turned into a silent shadow of himself, locked in the prison of Parkinson's. It would seem that now Arnold is the winner. But when they met again, already in the 2000s, the final act of this drama occurred. Schwarzenegger approached Ali, who could already barely lift his hand. He took his palm, the very palm that had once brought him to his knees. And do you know what Arnold did? He didn't test the grip. He simply pressed it to his cheek, and those who were nearby saw tears in the eyes of Iron Arnie. He realized that even now, when Ali cannot speak, he still remains the strongest person in the room, because the spirit does not shake, the spirit does not age. And that same bulging vein on Arnold's hand pulsed again, reminding him of that lesson in the photo studio. This is the true legacy of Muhammad Ali. He didn't just box. He deconstructed the very idea of human superiority. He showed that greatness is not what you see on magazine covers. Greatness is the ability to remain the master of the situation, even when your body declares war on you. That dagger, the vein on Arnold's wrist, became a symbol that each of us is vulnerable if we rely only on the outer shell. Ali pierced that shell with one movement of a finger, leaving a scar in Schwarzenegger's soul that was worth more than all his Mr. Olympia titles. Did Arnold win in life? Absolutely. But he lived it knowing that there is something in the world higher than volumes and weights. And now, as we stand at the finale of this story, looking at the ruins of two of the greatest bodies in history, I want to pass this dagger to you. We live in an era of the cult of appearance. We pump muscles. We apply filters. We build armor out of likes and status. But ask yourself honestly, what will remain of you if someone presses your nerve point? Is there that very void inside you that makes Ali invincible? Whose side are you on in this eternal war? The side of steel armor, which looks impressive but breaks from a single touch of the truth, or the side of the indestructible spirit, which shines brighter the weaker the body becomes? Who was Ali to Arnold, a cruel teacher or a savior who tore off his mask of omnipotence in time? Write one word in the comments: armor or spirit. I will be waiting for your answers, because it is in this choice that the answer lies to the question of what is more important for a person, to shine on the outside or to be invincible on the inside. Write down at what minute you realized that Arnold had already lost.